now. And I do have sort of a Frankenstein setup of screens and webcams and mics, and they're sort of connected as best as I can get, but we will just get started. So hello once again, and welcome to the first session in a series of webinars hosted by Ringette Alberta. For those who don't already know my name, I am Robin, and I'm the Sport Development Coordinator at Ringette Alberta. I'm excited to lead this evening's session on athlete-centered sport, partly because I'm an athlete myself, but also because we at Ringette Alberta really see the value in athlete-focused programming and decision-making. As I said, the session is being recorded and it will be made available after we are finished, and we will give those details a little bit later. The purpose of this evening is to answer the question, what is athlete-centered sport and what is athlete-centered Ringette? You'll be introduced to programs in our region that exemplify these principles, and the hope is that you as parents, board members, and decision makers will be able to have these ideas in the back of your head as you continue with conversations about children's Ringette, excellence Ringette programs, and other preparations you might be making for this upcoming season. We have 4 short presentations to lead us through, this concept and these questions. The first will be from Ringette Alberta's Athlete Advisory Committee. That'll be followed by Sherwood Park Ringette and their Learn to Play program. Next will be Calgary and their Flex Ringette program, and Richmond Ringette's president is here to discuss their registration policies and their athlete-focused process. We're gonna have a Q&A discussion period after all the presenters are completed, but if there's something specific you want to ask, you can use, I believe there's a raise hand function, or you can ask a question in the chat, which you can find. Mine's at the bottom of my screen and maybe at the top of your screen if you're not familiar with Zoom. So take just a second to look for those. And other than that, I think we are ready to go. If there's no pressing questions at this time, excuse me, I'm going to pass the screen on. I'd like to pass the screen on. The mic, I suppose I should say, on to members of the Ringette, pardon me, sorry, I lost my line. We're gonna pass on to Rachel Ung, Rebecca Shapiro, and Mackenzie Duggan of the Athlete Advisory Committee, and they will get started. You guys can go ahead and unmute yourselves when you are ready.
Okay, great, thanks, Robin. All right, so just to start off, we'll be presenting on athlete-centeredness today. So I'll just give a brief introduction of kind of who we are and what we do as a committee. And so I'm Rachel Ung. This past season, I'm a member of the Athlete Advisory Committee. This past season, I was a member of Calgary Wrath, and I was also on the senior national team. I also coached this year, and in the past, I've refed as well. And then we have Mackenzie and Becca on today as well. I'll let them introduce themselves.
Yeah, my name's Becca. I'm on the Athlete Advisory Committee. I play in Open in Calgary, and I'm also a referee.
I'm Mackenzie. I played U19 this last season. I also junior coach and ref.
All right, so just for those who maybe are unfamiliar with who we are, the Athlete Advisory Committee acts as an informed advisor to Ringette Alberta in the implementation of policies and the Ringette Alberta strategic plan as it pertains to the athletes. So the committee is a standing committee of the Ringette Alberta board and is governed by the RAB bylaws and the committee's policy. And so members of the committee should bring kind of perspective from all areas of Ringette in Alberta, including youth, adult, recreational, competitive, and excellence programs, which we do. We have about 8 members ranging from U16 up into Open. We have a parent on our council, and we also have former refs, coaches, and kind of a split of players between North and South here in Alberta. So kind of our objectives are to be a sounding board for policy changes. We're an advocate for change. So we've recently talked about children's Ringette and kind of given our ideas forward to the Ringette Alberta board. We like to contribute to the strategic plan. We bring forward issues from athletes from around the province. We're a liaison between athletes in Alberta and the RAB board, and we promote and develop the idea of athlete-centered sport in Alberta, which we'll be talking more about today.
Next, we just wanted to include the vision and the mission of Ringette Alberta, just because it was relevant to what we're going to talk about and being athlete-centered in general. So the vision being Ringette is a prominent sport throughout Alberta, played with pride by all ages, which builds well-rounded individuals and athletes with strength of character within. And then the mission, demonstrating effective leadership and good governance, providing high-quality programs and services to member associations, partnering with our members to achieve excellence, marketing to make Ringette the #1 sport choice for female athletes, cooperation to achieve common goals of competition on the ice and cooperation off the ice. So next, what does it mean to be athlete-centered? So we did kind of grab 2 definitions here. One's a bit longer than the second one, a little bit more concise. So the first definition is an athlete-centered sport is sport programming in which the athlete's needs are the top priority when making decisions and planning events. This means creating programs which allow athletes to have their needs and wants heard and allows them to answer questions such as what works for you and what do you want out of the season. Stakeholders should recognize this means athlete-centered and not Ringette player-centered. There are many more dimensions to a good athlete than being a strong player on the ice. And then the second, a little bit more concise, is that athletes have an optimal environment in which to enjoy the game and pursue their definition of success. So the next slide is just a little chart, and it compares the coach-centered coaching versus athlete-centered coaching with a few examples. So the first one is instruction. It's under the coach-centered coaching, it says it's telling athletes what to do. And then in athlete-centered coaching, it would be asking questions and guiding the athletes towards their own solutions. This creates game sense and confidence because players will start analyzing and strategizing themselves and recognizing certain things on the ice and in their own plays. The second point is that coach-centered coaching, they would determine the direction and goals for the team themselves or based on their own personal goals. Versus facilitating the athletes' individual and team goals based on what they would like to gain from playing Ringette that season. Sometimes it is winning a medal or getting a certain achievement, getting to Westerns, getting to Nationals. But we have to remember the steps along the way and that everyone has a different reason for playing Ringette and they're all equally valid. The third point is that coach-centered coach would focus on winning and the achievement of results. And the outcomes versus focusing on development and achievement of more specific goals that are more within the athlete's own control because there's so many little things you can do throughout a game that are entirely up to your players and their skills and what they can do versus just looking at the scoreboard at the end. The fourth point in coach-centered coaching is that a coach could expect athletes to comply with their instructions during games versus developing athletes that are self-aware, capable of making decisions, and able to self-correct. This lends again to the game sense and confidence necessary for a successful and positive Ringette playing experience for each individual on the team. The fifth point there is that a coach-centered coach might have a win-at-all-costs attitude. And in athlete-centered coaching, you want to develop the whole player, so a holistic approach, technically, physically, mentally, and socially. This approach will enable a positive experience and ensure that players will stay in the sport year after year and have a positive experience and want to come back and want to keep playing more. And then the last point in coach-centered coaching is viewing an athlete or a team as a collective with the same needs versus viewing the athletes as a collection of individuals and that all have individual needs. I think this point really sums up the whole idea of being athlete-centered in general. It's important to really get to know your players and value their input and their addition to your team, and to know the biggest reason, the biggest reported reason, if you ask any girl that plays Ringette from bunnies to NRL, the biggest reason that girls join and stick with Ringette as a sport is that they have a positive experience, they gain friendship, and the sportsmanship that Ringette has to offer.
All right, so I'll kind of move into the meat of our presentation and how we can be more athlete-centered. So as a group, we kind of identified two key components of an athlete-centered system. And so the first component is the ground level, which we would refer to as kind of the athlete experience. And then the second component is the board level and decision-making level. And I'll just pass this along to Mackenzie, and she'll kind of go into things to look for in the athlete experience.
Alrighty, so today I'm just going to be talking about what can be done directly while working with athletes at the ground level as a coach, just when you're trying to become more athlete-centered. I'm going to touch on a few of the main aspects that coaches can try to integrate into their coaching as they try to veer away from being coach-centered and more into athlete-centered. Basically, the main idea that everything about an athlete-centered coaching strategy comes back to is that athletes should feel heard. When they feel heard, they feel respected, and that will improve their all-around ringette experience and overall improve a team dynamic. If, as a coach, you are struggling on what you can do in a situation where you're trying to stay athlete-centered, it's always important to make sure you're staying in the athlete's best interest, and you can kind of ask yourself, will my athlete feel heard if I make that decision or not? So the first aspect you can utilize to become more athlete-centered is goal setting. It is important you're on the same page as your athletes, so at the beginning of the season, you should organize meetings of the entire team and also individual players meetings where you facilitate goal setting. For individual meetings, please note that you must be implementing the rule of two, which is a policy that came about with the Responsible Coaches movement, which you can find more information on coach.ca if you want to look more into that. Its purpose is to ensure that all coach and player interactions are open, observable, and justified. It states that we should be protecting athletes and coaches by making sure two or more adults are present in all athlete-coach situations. So this would include individual player goal-setting meetings. Regarding team meetings, a start of the year team meeting usually consists of setting team goals and expectations for the year. It is important to make sure this is mostly up to players. They should be the ones setting their own goals and setting their own expectations. Of course, as a coach, you can add any rules that you deem necessary, but it should mostly be them. Also allow them to set expectations for you as a coach, such as your behavior on the bench or what resources they believe you should be supplying. It's important to continue checking in with your players to kind of track their progress with their goals, remind them of the path they're on, and just keep them in check. And always acknowledge their progress and tell them that they're doing a good job. Always remember your main role as a coach is to help players achieve their goals. When you become a coach, you commit to doing and providing whatever you can to your players to help them reach their goals, whether that be ringette related or not, because like they mentioned earlier, it's athlete-centered coaching, not ringette player centered coaching. We're trying to better not just the player, but the whole person. I've included a diagram that goes over SMART goal setting, which can be a helpful goal setting strategy when trying to facilitate goal setting with your players, especially at a younger age. If this can help them gain sort of more of an understanding. I'll just go over it quickly. The S is for specific, which just entails you have to know exactly what you're trying to do. The M is for measurable, because you need to make sure you have a legitimate way of knowing when you've achieved your goal. The A stands for achievable, while the R stands for realistic, which both just add up to the fact that your goal has to be something that's in your power to control. Obviously, you want to have big goals, big dreams, but if it's absolutely something that you do not have any control over, it's probably not a good idea to set that goal. Lastly, the T stands for timely, which just means you should create a time frame for when you want to accomplish your goal. Like I said earlier, it is important that athletes are feeling heard when setting goals. You should be letting them take control. You can help, but in the end, it should be what they want to do. The next aspect I'll be discussing is feedback. Getting feedback is important for a coach to see how they're doing as they try to become more athlete-centered. The meetings I was talking about earlier should feel like a conversation, including a chance for feedback from both coaches and players on what can be done to better support the athletes, as well as acknowledging current progress and accomplishments. Make sure when you're giving players feedback, you're giving them both things they can work on and the positive things. When you're giving them things to work on, make sure you include what you as a coach are planning to do to help them reach that goal. It is important to allow players to have input on drills and plays and possibly create their own. This directly correlates to making sure athletes feel heard and making sure you're doing what you can for them regarding drills and plays. This also, letting them create their own, helps them with on-ice creativity and overall game sense. If you want to, you can try creating an anonymous form of feedback. This can include both players and parents, but overall, your most valuable feedback will come from players. Most importantly, take feedback into consideration. Feedback you receive is useless if you don't try to somehow put it into play. Always try to put yourself in the athlete's shoes and try to understand why they are giving you that certain feedback. Even if it doesn't make sense to you at first, often it can if you look at it from a player point of view. Obviously, this whole feedback aspect really correlates to making sure athletes feel heard, which, as I've stated already, is the main idea when it comes to athlete-centered coaching. The final aspect of athlete-centered coaching I'll be discussing is what happens during game time. During a game, it is important to wait until players return to the bench to provide instruction and direction instead of yelling while they're on the ice, which can be difficult to hear and add confusion. As a player, I know that a lot of times if my coaches are yelling at me when I'm on the ice, that's definitely not my main concern. We do not want to overwhelm them, as that will likely result in a more panicked on-ice performance and therefore a weaker on-ice performance. As well, feedback given between shifts should include not just what they can work on, but what they are doing well. It is important to remind them of the positives because you want them to keep a good attitude. Keeping a good attitude is what keeps them motivated as they play their game. Also, the feedback in between shifts should be kept short, simple, and easy to comprehend. We don't want to overload them. They will not be able to understand and utilize the advice, which just gives the whole advice-giving process a counterintuitive effect. Something you can try while giving feedback to players on the bench is leading them to the answer rather than giving them the answer. For example, if you want your player to cut middle when they're breaking the ring out the ice, do not just tell them, when you're breaking out the ring, I need you to cut middle. Say, okay, so that didn't work last time, so what can you do next time to make it work so that you don't get checked when you're breaking out? And then continue to lead them to the answer until they get cut middle. This way they have a better understanding of what you're asking them to do and why you need them to do it. This will also give them a sense of accomplishment when they get the answer. Lastly, coaches are role models and set an example. Interactions with officials should be respectful and reasonable. Negative attitudes and actions from anyone, especially coaches, affects everyone. As soon as a coach speaks out of line to a ref, they are destroying a very important role model for their players, which is themselves. Coaches should be trying to set an example for their players regarding mental toughness and accepting what one cannot control, which are two of the biggest mental lessons of sport in general. They should be trying to model that behavior. So that wraps up my part of our athlete-centered discussion. I hope I helped you to gain an understanding of what coaches can do as they go on their journey to become more athlete-centered. I'm now going to pass the presentation on to Rachel so she can discuss the board level aspects of becoming athlete-centered.
All right, so when we say athlete-centered, we're more referring to a term that's both a concept and a process rather than just a single action or event. So in an athlete-centered sports system, the values, programs, policies, resource allocation, and priorities need to have kind of a primary emphasis on the consideration of athletes' needs and their performance goals. And so at the board or association level, there are kind of 5 important components that we need to think about. And so the first are priorities, and so these may be different for each association, and there's going to be different priorities within the association for each division. So examples of general priorities for an organization could be enjoyment, athlete well-being, lifelong sport participation, or skill and strategy improvement. And then as you transition from younger to older age groups, you can see those priorities shifting from fundamental skills and development to more providing adequate strategy and system instruction. And so the second component in decision making is resource allocation. So it becomes kind of about how we're going to utilize our resources to achieve our priorities. And so resources in Ringette are often kind of precious and limited. So it has to be decided what areas we're going to allocate them to in order to most efficiently improve the athlete experience. So if some of your priorities are skill development and positive team experiences, then maybe more resources will be funneled into additional coach development so that they are able to improve the ways they instruct or communicate with their athletes. And then another component are the programs that our associations create, or ones that may be province-wide. So for example, some associations have created junior coach development programs in order to encourage current players to give back to the younger age groups. And so the purpose of these programs are to both encourage community involvement and to provide younger age groups with a female role model who is currently playing the game. And then other examples of programs could include Flex Ringette, Intro to Ringette programs, or the Flexible Open Ringette registration, which will be discussed with our next presenters. And then other examples of programs could be coaching clinics, goalie development if associations are having issues retaining goalies, or coach mentorship programs that are kind of pairing younger coaches with older coaches, just so they can share their knowledge and maybe share some drills and strategies. And then another component of athlete-centered sport are the values. And then these are values that we want our athletes to learn and kind of carry with them into their lives, whether or not they're involved with Ringette. And so these values can include sportsmanship, respect for themselves, teammates, coaches, referees, parents, or opponents, or teamwork, which is something that we always want to think about in Ringette. And then the last component we want to think about is policy formation. It's a key component when shaping the athlete experience, as policies can kind of provide that structure and support in organizations. And examples of policies could include things like team formation, code of conduct to kind of set those expectations for our parents and our players, as well as our coaches, coach selection and how we select our coaches, or another policy could be on how we receive feedback or how you seek to gain feedback from the athletes. And so when we think about what an athlete-centered system looks like, there's a few characteristics that Athletes Canada has identified. And so the first is accountability, which means that the sport organization is accountable to the players and the members of the organization. And then we then have equity and fairness, which means that training and competitive opportunities are both accessible and inclusive. So an example of this would mean like maybe equal ice allocation among an age group, regardless of whether or not they're step A or step 1, 2, or 3, or level A or B. Another characteristic is empowerment. So when we empower athletes, leadership and decision-making skills are developed, and our athletes are encouraged to develop and exercise their full range of abilities, both on and off the ice. And then finally, we have extended responsibility, which I kind of think is one of the most important parts of our associations. And so extended responsibility means that the system recognizes the long-term impact it has on the athlete's life, and that leaders of the associations make decisions considering the long-term consequences for athletes. So as a result, the athlete is motivated to participate in sport lifelong, and that doesn't mean it has to be Ringette, it just means they're going to continue on a healthy and enjoyable lifestyle. And so while it's easy for parents or coaches to maybe be focused on the short-term success of a single team, it's really important to recognize the long-term benefits of sports for females, as Ringette and team sports help promote self-esteem, communication skills, healthy habits, and these will stick with them throughout their lives. So it's essential that we work to provide the best possible environment and experience for our athletes. And so finally, there's a couple questions that at the decision-making level that we can ask ourselves. And so one of the main ones is playing Ringette a positive experience for the athletes? And if it's not, how can we make that experience better? So oftentimes we find things may appear to be athlete-centered, but maybe in reality, they may be negatively affecting the athletes. So for example, it's becoming more and more common for teams to pick up additional ice for practices or exhibition games on top of the ice they already are allocated for their association. And so some recent ice allocation data showed that actually some of the U12 teams are practicing close to 60 times per season, with sometimes up to 5 practices a week. And so this excludes exhibition, league, or tournament games. And so short term, it may seem like a good idea and a way to develop individual team and to develop team skills, but it can actually have more of a negative consequence in the long run if we're thinking about an athlete-centered system. So for example, this may incur extra costs for the families that they were not expecting. It doesn't leave a lot of extra time left over to do other sports or extracurricular activities, which is something that we want to be encouraging at the U12 level. And as well, it could be inadvertently causing less team bonding due to scattered attendance, as some families may be unable to fit all these extra ice times into their schedules. And so another question would be, how are we supporting the emotional, psychological, and physical well-being of our athletes, and where we can improve in those areas? Are athletes receiving quality coaching and instructions? And if not, do coaches have access to the appropriate resources? And what can we do to kind of give them those tools where they can be successful in their own divisions with their teams? And then finally, looking more big picture, what proportion of athletes continue to play Ringette year over year, and for how long? So if we kind of start to see a big drop off at a certain age or level, what can we do to keep players in the game longer? And then again, this could be in the form of maybe flex Ringette or flexible open registration dates. And then additionally, it's important to consider the type of feedback we're receiving, and then are we taking the opportunity to gain feedback, maybe at different touch points throughout the season or just at the end? And then if so, what type of feedback are we receiving from the athletes? Because this feedback really is some of the most important feedback, as it can give insight into the athlete experience and how we can be more athlete-centered moving forward. So that'll kind of sum up our definition of athlete-centeredness. We'll have time for questions and more of a discussion at the end, but I'll just take this as an opportunity to hand it over to, I believe, Sherwood Park, and they'll be discussing their children's Ringette here.
Before we switch over though, we do, if you go a few slides forward, Robin, we have our link and our little form. So if you go on the Ringette Alberta website, or if you use that link and you click Athlete Advisory Committee, it'll bring you to this form. So you can encourage any of your athletes to use this. It's for anybody. It's totally open. If you have any questions or anything you want us to talk about in a meeting or bring up to the board, you can go through this little form and message us directly. And you can tell your athletes to use this as well if they have any concerns they'd like us to talk about.
Excellent. Thank you for adding that, Rebecca. And thank you to Rachel and Mackenzie as well. As you said, there will be time. We'll do some questions and discussion at the end. Unless someone has something pressing, they can put that in the chat and I will get to it. And yeah, I will pass this on. One thing to think of, you may be thinking, okay, how do I implement these policies, these principles? So we're going to hear 3 examples of some really athlete-centered programming. So I'd like to introduce Jen and Sandra from Sherwood Park Ringette Association. They're going to share some info about Sherwood Park's Learn to Play program.
Okay, hi, I'm Jen Rogers from Sherwood Park. It says Kate Rogers on your screen. And I've lived and played in Sherwood Park and been part of the Ringette community for too many years to count now. And I have Sandra with me as well. She's our marketing director who has worked on this program with myself this past year. So Sandra's here too to help me out with the behind the scenes of the program. So we started a Learn to Play program last year. And what it is we saw that there was a need to market the sport beyond just a 1 day or a 1 hour of Come Try Ringette. So this program wasn't replacing Come Try Ringette, but we were adding to the programming post-Christmas. So we felt that it gave the players an opportunity to try it beyond 1 hour. 1 hour is kind of hard for a lot of them to grasp what this is all about. Some of them will cry the whole time, whereas if they maybe have a little more time at it, another week or two, or ours are anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks. So they could try it a little bit more and get a better feeling of whether this is something they want to participate in for a full season. So like I said, it's once per week, and we ran them for 4 to 6 weeks last year and this year, although our second session this year got cut short. So it would be January, February up to Family Day, and then we start another one after Family Day through approximately 4 to 6 weeks leading up to spring break. So we fitted between Family Day and spring break. We want to make it affordable for families to try this. So we ran it around the $10 per ice time per child, making them accountable to show up. So there was a fee. However, like I say, it's got to be reasonable that they will come out and try it. We found if it was going to be free, then people would kind of show up and kind of not. So the $10 was just below. What we researched was trying recreational sports in our community was usually $15 to $20 an hour. So we wanted to keep it equal or a little bit below that. And keeping in mind, they needed to bring their own equipment as well, of course. It's just sanctioned through Ringette Alberta, so that was covered with insurance. And then they're required to bring their skates, helmet, gloves, neck guard, knee pads, elbow pads. Those are things they could bring themselves. We didn't, if it was just volleyball knee pads or elbow pads, it didn't matter. But the big piece that we struggled with was the Ringette mask. So what we did was we bought masks, a bunch of masks, and we rented them out to the players. For the cost, it was the deposit was the cost of the mask. So they gave us a check for the deposit of the mask, making sure that we got it back at the end. And then if they figured they were going to continue playing Ringette or join the next season or do a summer camp that would be coming up, then they had the opportunity. We would keep the deposit and the mask would be theirs. And then of course we have sticks from Come Try Ringette. So we lent them a stick as well. So we figured everything they could borrow, skates, helmets, masks, knee pads, all those things they could borrow, but the big hurdle was the Ringette mask. So that's why we put that into place, and it worked out quite well. The first day we had a whole bunch of adults there assembling the masks onto the helmets for people. And then on the last day they came back and they would return the masks. We have 1 to 2 coaches adult coaches on the ice. And then we used our U16, U19 athletes to assist with the program. And we had anywhere from 24 to 32 kids on a half ice, that would be. So you could probably run up to 40 people on the ice because they're quite tiny. They don't move around overly quick. And our ages, we gave it was 5 years old and up. So 5 by the end of that year and up. So we had kids anywhere from 5 to, Sandra, you could help me out here.
Yeah, it was. We actually had a 14-year-old this year.
Yeah. So we would put the older kids together. We had anywhere from 9 to 14. We put them as a group, and then we'd group the other little guys in more on a skating basis. So our on-ice content looks similar to an active start practice. So you could see a diagram if you are only using a half ice. If you're using a full ice, then in one end we had skating skills, basic skating skills. In the other end, we'd have basic ringette skills, passing, checking, shooting, things like that. And then in the middle section of the ice, we made sure that we're playing a fun game. We do cross ice, 3-on-3, 4-on-4. We'd bring out a soccer ball and play hand soccer, getting them to bend their knees and using their hands instead of their feet. And then, of course, at the start of the ice time, we start with a game, and at the end of the ice time, we always ended with fans in the stands, because what better way do you end a practice than with fans in the stands? And they all really love that. So that's how we split up our ice, and we just kept it very basic, but really focused in on the fun part.
All right, so hi everyone. So as Jen was saying, so we really focused on advertising, getting it out to everybody. So we're very blessed. We have a strong social media with Sherwood Park Ringette. So they were blasting it out on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, just letting everybody know that this was happening. We also put it out towards our community. So our community has signage that we were able to get a discounted pricing. So we were able to put that up. And as well, we had emailed all our prior participants for Come Try Ringette, as well as from the first Learn to Play session the year before. So we kept in contact and let them know about it. So I would definitely recommend is having the word out there. Social media was our biggest support in this. Also, one thing that we heard from feedback is once they're registered, providing lots of details possible, explaining exactly what equipment they need, also where they can buy equipment, even where they can get skate sharpened, because for a lot of them, it's their first time even being in a sport on the ice, as well as what programs we were offering. So we were going to offer some spring sessions, so we gave them that information. And one thing that we also did at the end was we held a parent meeting, and that was held during the last ice time. So the on-ice coach explained a little bit about the program, answered any questions, and then explained our Active Start program. And we had some parents ask, like, how far can you go in Ringette? So we explained that at Offern University, as well as their national Ringette team, playing for Junior Senior Canada. So we wanted to kind of show the vast from where they start, where they could end up. We also explained how to register. We sent them the links, and we also sent them information about all the camps that were available in Edmonton and in Sherwood Park for the spring and summer. And as well as, for example, if they were doing Active Start, how many practices they could expect during the season, and as well what the cost would be. So we just found it quite beneficial. The more information you gave, the parents seemed to really appreciate it. It gave them a good overview of what everything would be.
So our first year in 2018, I guess it would be January 2019, we had an approximate 50% conversion rate that signed up for the next season. From there, we also had some kids that were in our Learn to Play program in January 2019. They just weren't ready to play a full season yet. So they have come back to Learn to Play this year again, and now they're ready to join. Those kids were like the younger of the group initially. It just gave them and it gives them an opportunity to try the sport more than once, just for an 8-week session. I know when my kids were little, I signed them up for everything that, 8 weeks of this or 8 weeks of that. It just gave them an opportunity to try different things and decide what they'd like to do. I mean, Ringette's not for everybody. I have 2 girls, and one plays and one doesn't. So, but if you can give them the biggest opportunity to try it, versus just 1 hour of trying it, versus a whole entire season and then they're hating it and they're being dragged to this sport that they don't even want to do. That's not fun as a parent either. So the 4 to 6 weeks worked really well. We did push one session to 8 weeks. It got a little bit long just because of the amount that you can do with this type of group. It's a big group of kids, from 5 to, like I say, 12, 14 years old. Is a big difference in obviously maturity and skills. So it's challenging on the ice, but a ton of fun. Like I look forward to it every week, and I'm coaching 14AA. So it brings you back to what it's really all about. So yeah, like I say, we didn't get to finish the Learn to Play this year, unfortunately, due to the virus, but we hope to keep this program going in our community and maybe some other communities, increasing our numbers, having other ways of having people find out about Ringette and just coming to try it.
Perfect. Thank you both, Jen and Sandra. Keith Geese is in the chat. He said he had a little one in this program. She only lasted 4 weeks, but it did allow him to see that she was not interested. I know Keith has other little ones in Ringette. So like you said, it's not for everyone. But he said he was very happy with what he saw, and he saw it through some of the social media posts on Facebook. So that's great feedback. Thank you for sharing that, Keith. And thanks to Jen and Sandra. Again, if no one has anything specific, we'll move on. I'd like to pass the mic on to Mary. She's coming to us from Calgary, and she is going to discuss Calgary's Flex Ringette program, which was new this year. Oh, and in the chat already, Rob Pearson of Fort Saskatchewan says Fort Saskatchewan Ringette Association would be willing to work with SPRA on this program because they probably can't offer it themselves. But I think that's a great idea. Come try Ringette. Really, I know this is a little beyond Come Try Ringette, but that's something we want to encourage is sort of regional cooperation in intro and trying programs. Dave has one question for Jen and Sandra. Any thought on running this in the fall as well as the winter? Jen, you're on mute. There you go.
Sorry. Yeah, I think we did throw it around in the fall. Except the fall is just a really busy time for the association and getting the teams up and running. So I don't know if we ever came to a conclusion about running it in the fall as well.
I think we had talked about, Jen, I think we had mentioned about running it in August before evaluations, but I think we had agreed that the fall would be a little chaotic just because starting up with the season and so forth. Yeah,
we had thrown around like 6 weeks prior to Christmas, I think. Mm-hmm. But I'm not sure why that never got going. I think we're just so overwhelmed at that first 3 months of the season, and everybody just needs kind of a break. And then you kind of get fired up again in January. But it's definitely possible. It's Lindsay, I think you're on here. Maybe you could share a bit on that. Lindsay's a VP in Sherwood Park right now.
Yeah, so our original plan was to run a program in late August, hoping to attract players that would want to then register for September, and that was to bridge the gap that we had low step 1 numbers last year, so we were hoping to attract additional players in that age group. But now, because of what's going on in our communities, we have put that idea on hold, and maybe in the next year we'll look at doing that again.
I think we talked about oh yeah, that's right, September. You could do a 4-week program because step 1 or active start and all those programs don't start till after Thanksgiving. So you could squeeze in a good 4-week program in September.
Yeah, so we won't look at doing that this year, but maybe,
No.
you know, in the following year.
That's a good point. It's a good concept, and definitely if people are working sort of regionally together, it could make that more viable, right?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. I'm going to keep moving along. We can come back to this conversation if we want, but I'll pass it to Mary, who's going to talk about Flex Ringette, which is another very athlete-focused program out of Calgary this year.
Okay, so I've been involved in Ringette in Calgary for about 20 odd years, mostly now with Cora as my daughter, as I manage my daughter's open team and I sit on the Cora board. But so the background to Flex was, I think during the last few years, all levels of Ringette have started to recognize that athletes have different personal needs when it comes to playing Ringette. Through the Ringette Calgary's competition review, Ringette Calgary saw a need for defining recreational versus competitive programs. For Ringette Alberta, defining recreational into children's, classic and flex versus excellence. And in Calgary, it was addressing what could be done for players in the U16, U19 divisions that for their own reasons still wanted to play Ringette, but with less time commitment than the classic Ringette. So in the spring of 2019, Ringette Calgary sent out a survey to the U16, U19 players, and approximately 44 players said they would be interested, equating to approximately 4 teams of 11 players. So we thought we would give it a whirl. So what the players wanted, and Ringette athletes in Alberta were polled to ask their thoughts. They responded with, it was the same game, same commitment as classic or excellence, but not as frequent, with no coaches, no practices, just a game every 7 to 10 days. So what the Calgary associations wanted, representatives from the quadrants in Ringette Calgary met in the spring of 2019 to start designing the Ringette Calgary Flex program. The program design had elements of classic Ringette, that is with coaches and code of conduct, friends requests, but athletes had to make a choice between classic or flex. This wasn't a program for extra time. Where we landed, Flex Ringette in Calgary ended up being a hybrid between Ringette Calgary's framework, what an athlete wanted, and what Calgary Quadrants wanted. We offered 2 sessions, a fall and a winter, with 11 games scheduled in each session. The second session only had the 9 games due to COVID-19. Friends' requests were honored. There were no coaches, and registration happened through several sites. Each quadrant offered Flex Ringette, but all the registration was going towards creating these 4 teams. Ringette Alberta had it up on their site, and so did Ringette Calgary. While registration was slow at start, we ended up with 30 players for the fall session and 11 players for the winter session. What seemed to work for us is players wanted to know the when and where of the games in advance so they could schedule around the games. Equipment like rings, score sheets, etc. If they can be stored at a facility, that would be bonuses because there are no coaches to bring them along to each game. We had really good success with referee game suggestions. If in the second half where it was more playing 4 on 4 or with just one goalie, they were able to provide new ideas to keep the game interesting. Advertising via social media by all levels helped with getting the word out. Ringette Alberta helped us do targeted emails to players in these age groups that haven't registered for the last few years. We identified the teams with team jerseys, which gave them a sense of team. What didn't work is having a drop dead date in July or August, because I think that swayed people from joining or not joining Flex Ringette. Some went back to Classic Ringette because they didn't want to get caught short with not having an option. We had a lot of learnings, so areas we could use improvement is communication. We had a parent meeting at the start of the game and emphasized player commitment. We didn't use Team Snap, but so it was really hard to gauge how many people were coming to any given game. The goalie commitment, we had a limited pool of goalies. I think there was 3 in the first half and 2 in the second half. So if a goalie couldn't come and we didn't get sufficient notice, we didn't have necessarily a goalie pool to draw from. So thank goodness we had shooter tutors. Socializing. One suggestion, the feedback that we got from the players was maybe doing some sort of icebreaker at the beginning of the year so that the players could get to know each other. I think we need to analyze what is the best time to play. Is it truly the weekend, a Sunday morning, which is what we offered, mostly 9:30 to 11, 9:30, 10:30, 10:45. Was that the best time? Any earlier, we didn't get players out, and if we held it during the weekday, it was hard to. We offered a couple of 5:30 to 6:30 on Wednesdays. I'm not sure that was the right time either for them. Balancing of the teams. Well, it was nice that you could play with your friends depending on the caliber of player you are. They sometimes skewed the balancing of the teams, and we had lopsided teams. Registration, we didn't necessarily ask on our registration form what position they played. So it was hard. The first time we tried to balance the team, I think I had all defense on one team and all offense on another team because I didn't know what position the girls played. We might want to reconsider the number of officials needed. If it's more 4-on-4, do you really need 2 reps as opposed to 1 rep? And advertising, how else can we get the word out? And constant social media. And I think the other 2 points were, could the 3rd year U19 players potentially be affiliated to an open team? And if the registration numbers are low, rather than playing 4-on-4, could we schedule exhibition games between the other U16, U19 teams in the area? Could we schedule exhibition games periodically? And should we offer it again? Absolutely. And I think it'll take off, especially in lieu of COVID-19.
Okay, thanks, Mary. Thank you. I'm just going to catch everyone up in the chat. There's a few questions. The first was from Rebecca Shapiro of the Athlete Committee. She asked why there was no coaching. I will Dave, our executive director, asked that. He said there was not coaches for flex because the athletes just want to go play the game. They didn't want to be constantly corrected or instructed. They weren't there to be, let's call it hyper competitive. They were there to play a competitive single game. They didn't want to be referred to as like purely recreational drop-in, but they just didn't want that aspect to Ringette. And if they wanted more coaching, more commitment, et cetera, that would be for classic or excellence programs. Let's see. Michelle asked if flex is ran in U14. Oh, sorry, I need to go back. Someone from, I believe, the Airdrie Ringette Association said any plans to expand flex Ringette to U14. And someone chimed in to say, if flex is ran at U14, wouldn't coaches need to be on the bench? So no, there's no difference in the need for coaches between U14, U16, and U19. There is a requirement for adult supervision. So Dave or Mary, could you comment on, while there weren't coaches, there was still adult supervision?
Yeah, we had a parent sign up to be on the bench. They weren't necessarily coaches, but that was the adult supervision.
So just really quickly to summarize that, when we did our athlete focus group sessions on the different participation contexts, it was very clear that people choosing flex Ringette, as Robin said, really just wanted to go play the game without that sort of constant instruction. So please don't confuse no coaches with no adult supervision. So we still have, because we are dealing with minors, we still had to have adult supervision, and those adults still had to comply with the screening policy. So don't confuse no coaches with no adult supervision.
Thank you. There was another question from Fenna. She said, will there be flex in other zones next season? Dave, you can jump in after me, but the original plan when we were looking at, when Ringette Alberta was looking at these huge programming changes, both to children's, to excellence, and then the creation of flex, the plan was to have flex begin, I believe, in 2021. So not this season, but the following season from now. And Calgary took the initiative and saw the need and thought they could have a viable program and put it into place. And I'm glad they did. And, we kept these players in the game and active. And as Dave says, flex can be run wherever associations want to team up and get it going. With Ringette Alberta guidance, we can guide you. Mary has shared a lot of things that worked and didn't work, so that's great to be able to learn. Mary, I think you could answer this. With 11 players on the in flex, did the kids play 5 versus 6? What do you feel is the ideal range of players for the program?
So if there was 5, we didn't do 5 versus 6. It would be more 4 versus 4, so that there was always somebody that could substitute on and off. I think if you could have 11 per team, that would be ideal to keep it playing 5-on-5. So you have 2 lines and a goalie. That would be optimal.
Okay, I hope that answers the question. Rebecca has a follow-up question, which Dave is answering in the chat, which was, does the adult supervisor on the bench have the same training as a coach would? Her concern is safety, very important concern. Dave said they were required to have first aid. We didn't get into concussion protocol details, but perhaps that is something that Rebecca and the rest of the athlete committee can discuss going forward, especially if there's increased interest in flex. Thank you for all these great questions. And thank you to Mary. Oh, we have more questions. Okay, we'll try and we'll have this be the last question on flex, and then we will move on to our final presentation, and we can come back to questions. So Mary, could you clarify, is 11 players enough signed up? Did they all show up every week to be able to run the program?
No, they didn't show up every week, but I would say the majority of them would show up. So it would be, for the smaller association, if you have a small team size, it's dependent on who shows up and who doesn't show up on a weekly basis. I know that may not answer the question, but.
All right. Dave is here in the chat, so if people have questions, they can be answering them. But I would love to pass this on. We have James Snowden here. His presentation is titled, "Why Registration Never Stops." James is the president of Richmond Ringette Association in BC, and we're happy he's able to share some of his insights from their community with our members today. Go ahead whenever you're ready, James.
Thank you, Robin, and good evening to everybody, and hello to David. I had a chance to meet David last year at the Ringette BC AGM, and so out of that meeting comes this presentation. So my presentation is Registration Never Stops, or Why It Does Never Stop. And let me see if I can get the screen to advance here. Being a newbie, oh, there we go, okay. I'm gonna start tonight by discussing a Ringette player's story real quickly, and then the youth sport market in general, motivation, a little bit of marketing, and then into our player-centric process, which is how we kind of recruit and register players, and some conclusions. Now, just to be right up front with everybody, most of our registrations come through the traditional way, but we do keep our registration open the entire season. And in fact, we probably would have never closed it had it not been for COVID-19. So I'll start with the Ringette player story, and this is a fabulous young lady from Richmond, and I wanted to read her statement out. She said she began playing Ringette at the late age of 14. And as a result, now that's not that old, but I guess in Ringette years, maybe, she's starting a little late. And there was, as a result, there were numerous obstacles that prevented her to being, in her mind, successful. So that definition of success that the athlete committee was talking about. She said she struggled to learn how to skate, or at least improve her skating, and then keep up with the skills of the other players. So nevertheless, she adapted and improved her skills by attending early morning power skating sessions and shooting clinics outside of the regular practices, familiarizing herself with the coaches, bonding with her teammates, and as a result ended the season with multiple goals, an MPV award at the, no, it should be Most Valuable Player Award at the West Coast Classic and even at provincials. So that's a story. I'd like you to keep this story in perspective as I talk through registration and how we operate. Okay, ready for the next page. All right, so some statistics that I got from 2014, a little bit old, but really I don't think it's that far off. 60% of youth play sports on an organized basis, according to the Canadian Youth Sports Report, which was a major research study out of Toronto. And of course, for females, young girls between the ages of, I believe it's 3 to 17, swimming, dance, soccer, ballet, gymnastics are all near the top. But skating is also a very big part of and popular with females. So we know that that could be figure skating, but also that's all kinds of skating sports. And bottom line here, going to the next page, is that youth sport is a competitive market. And here in Richmond, we have lots of different sports year-round that we compete against. Soccer, that runs from September typically right through till the end of February. There's basketball, both in community level basketball and school, volleyball, and hockey, female hockey, just to name a few. And there's many, many more activities that young ladies can be involved in. So our realization is that sports is competitive and we need to have a competitive advantage in Ringette. So we also take a look at, well, what motivates people to play a sport? And we know that playing a sport in order to spend time with your friends and make new friends is one of the most common reasons for participating in sport. And I mean, particularly with girls, but it's not only girls. There's a great deal of importance on those social relationships. And children belong to several groups and engage in different activities with those groups. This is all coming from a study by the International Journal of Behavior, Nutrition, and Physical Activity. But I mean, it's common sense for a lot of people who have been involved in organized sport. So what we take from their study and which builds into our registration practices is that a strategy that aims to promote that physical activity through the friendship groups is an effective means of not only promoting and increasing the physical activity, but actually attracting people into the sport of Ringette. So on the marketing, we have a target audience. We're looking for school-age kids between the ages of 5 and 12 to get involved in Ringette early. We know there are barriers to participation. I mean, some of the few are cost and ice, and of course the registration. Under traditional registration, there's not a lot of flexibility to join if you're suddenly want to join. So we had to kind of look at all of those three issues and put a strategy together around that. Obviously, we want to increase people's awareness of Ringette and showcase the sport. I know after the West Coast Classic, which in January, which was one of the biggest sporting events in the city of Richmond, a lot of the folks out at the airport when the girls were flying home to Prince George in Alberta and some from Manitoba, they did not know what the sport was. They thought they were all here to play hockey. So we know that showcasing the sport is critical in our marketing and ultimately our registration strategy. So our process for recruiting and attracting and being flexible to get people involved in Ringette is centered around players or athletes, if you will. And we start with a gym Ringette program, which is we don't need to have ice, and I will speak a little bit more about that, but we always tie gym Ringette in with a come try Ringette session. Come tries run basically from September, usually right into, well, sometimes we have them in July, but definitely right to June. And of course we have registration open. So if you're joining partway into the season, you can join this season, or you can be signing up early for the next season. And then ultimately, as we bring new players in, there's a lot of individual development that has to take place to get players able to skate and participate. All right, so gym Ringette. Gym Ringette, we offer that program at schools. It's free. We have usually U19 players, sometimes open players, and there are also, actually, I think there were a couple of ladies from the NRL actually that went out to some schools to run a program in the gym. So they run age appropriate games for the students. So they play kind of like a floor hockey style of Ringette, but it's not only Ringette, there's also some other fun activities depending on the age of the kids. And the after that program is run, of course, we're promoting immediately, come out to our Come Try Ringette event. So we follow up that gym Ringette with a Come Try event. The registration is open, so if we happen to have done this in, let's say, October, kids can jump right into the season. We've even had kids join as late as early February after a gym Ringette and a Come Try Ringette. Of course, we offered them discounts that late in the season, and also the ability to go into Springette, which is our spring program. So bottom line, we keep that registration open, and then of course we have to have skills development during the season. So that's going back to the young lady that I started with the story. Children may be coming in to play. Their skating skills need improvement. They need other skills like shooting and even just understanding the game. So we have to fit that into our program. So ultimately, this is a numbers game, and I have a little chart over here on the right. I'm not trying to show you the exact numbers, but what we find out of our program of keeping the registration open from September to February is that we typically double the size of our Fun 1, Fun 2. So that's the original U7, U9 kind of bunnies group. So we may start the season with, say, 20 players, and by the time we get to December, we have 40 players. And ultimately, that's what we're trying to do, is keep that registration open and keep the numbers up. Now, because the funds don't play in scheduled games or on full ice, they can jump in at almost any time, and we can assess them based on their skills. That is not to say, though, that we don't get kids in older groups. We do take in players in older age groups when based on their abilities and the timing, and it helps us to build up our numbers. So as an example, I think it was the first week of November, we were able to recruit a U19 level A player. Now, she had played ringette when she was quite young, but had gone on to hockey. And we actually were able to add her to our U19 team, which was a rather small team. And we were able to put together an A-level team because we were keeping that registration open late. Okay. So my conclusions here are that we do promote our sport through school friendship groups. Think of that as your target audience, and that is really that player, athlete-centric idea. We reach out to school kids while they're in school. If we were running our programs in the summer, it's very difficult to get to that group of kids that may want to join together. So it's very, very critical. We reach out to them while they're in school. Of course, we have to with the gym ringette. We showcase the ringette in the gym without ice. So again, we don't have to have people come out to the arenas. The ice is no longer the barrier. And then we follow up with our come try ringettes. But ultimately, this all fits together and it all connects because we have a flexible registration, and that gives us a competitive advantage in the youth sport arena, essentially. And that is the full extent of my presentation. I will take some questions now or later, wherever that fits in with you, Robin.
There we go. Thank you, James. That was very concise and informative. I'm just going to stop share. There we go. Yeah, so we will open up for questions. Yeah, Q&A and discussion. We'll keep with either the hand raising or this chat format that we have. You can ask questions of any of our presenters, and we can pass it on if you have some of those questions. Feel free. Bronwyn, who is our coaching coordinator, she's also sent me a few questions on the side, but she asked, was this a pilot year for this in BC with sort of the unlimited registration date, let's call it?
No, we've done this for several years. I think it started around 2016 or 2017. So it's been our common practice now for a while.
Okay. And Fenna has a question, and this ties into another question Bronwyn texted me on this side. She said, how did other teams respond to having a late entry U19 team? I think to clarify, this was an individual player added to a U19 team, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. It was, we did have a U19 team, but they were quite lean. I think we were in the neighborhood of about 11 or 12 players. And of course, with the commitments that players have at that age group, you need spares. And essentially, we did not have a problem. We went through Ringette BC to sign up the player late. Now, what it did mean ultimately, or would have meant, is that that particular player couldn't have gone to provincials or westerns because of the late sign up. And we were lamenting that fact because she had just missed it by just over a week. But given the virus, it never actually played out that way. So we were kind of spared that heartbreak because you know, a strong player that was committed would have been lost for a postseason play.
And that ties into another question of, you know, open registration. This late registration, I guess, open registration is great. But one possible objection would be, how does, like, are you really adding, let's call it a ringer to your team for playoffs? Like, what if you're adding a very strong player, presuming this person was a strong athlete anyway?
Well, I mean, that's a fairly rare case. Most of the time, what we're talking about is building up our Fun 1s and Fun 2s, or augmenting some players in U10 and U12, typically at the community level or B player level players. So it's not very common for it to be put into a situation where we're stacking a team or creating controversy.
Right, because you're not shifting people between teams. These are brand new people.
That's correct. So let's say that we had a 9-year-old come in. They would start out probably in Fun 1, Fun 2, prove their skills. If they were capable, it may be possible that they join a U10B team before the end of the season. But that depends on the amount of space that we have and the coach. Coaches' assessments, essentially. We're not, as an association, we're not trying to force players into a bad situation. It's meant to let them start and join the game at a time that works for them.
Excellent. Dave asked a question in the chat for James again. It says, one of the objections we've heard from our associations in the past to open or later registration is that it is, quote, too hard. As a volunteer, do you feel this is a legitimate objection?
It's so normal to us now that I would say that it's our lifeblood. I would say that it's part of our culture now. And I mean, there could be some challenges if you're in a situation where you have to start splitting teams. Because you would have too many players. But again, like I say, it's usually at the the Fun 1, Fun 2, U10 level, where typically we have flexibility there to add players and not impact league play.
Was it a lot of extra work at the beginning when you first made this adjustment?
You know what? Our registrar and treasurer kind of went a little bit nuts because we had different rules for pricing on the registrations, and there was some prorating sometimes. But actually, I think the coaches, especially at the youngest level, didn't have objectives. It's sort of like there's always room for one more is kind of the mentality.
Great. Do we have more questions again for any of the programs? I'm also open to hearing some ways that you are already athlete focused in your association beyond these three. Maybe you run a similar program. Oh, another question came for James from Airdrie Ringette. They said, have you ever experienced ice constraints due to late registrants? This is a common problem, I think, everywhere, is ice limitations.
No, we haven't. Richmond is very lucky. We have a lot of ice, and there's flexibility there with the city of Richmond to get more ice if we need it. We actually had to give some ice back this winter because of some other scheduling issues that came up. But normally ice is not a problem for us, but I understand. I could see how some associations where the ice is tight might not, it could be a tipping point, but again, usually with the younger kids, there's space for fun ones and fun twos for sure.
Right. Rob from Fort Saskatchewan is saying that, agreeing that ice is their major limiter, which I think really comes into play if you're adding, if you've planned for 2 teams and you've added so many players that now you have 3 or 4 at Fun 1 and Fun 2. But how many players register, let's call it late, like after your sort of typical registration?
Well, for Fun 1 and Fun 2 combined, we're looking at somewhere between, I would say 30 to 50%. But when we say late, they're on board usually before Christmas. I mean, the vast majority are coming in September, October, November. Yeah, we have to scramble a little bit, but it's not that bad.
Okay, thank you. And Ringette says thank you for answering the question as well. Again, we can take some time if anyone wants to share some ways that they believe they are already athlete focused. Dave is asking a question to the group. He says, I want to get a sense from the associations on the call, how many of you who have a desire for Ringette to grow are willing to explore these other options just to make it easier to join and stay in the game? This could be anything from you want to explore regional flex Ringette, you want to do these open registration programs, policies. We already got a yes from Rob from Fort Saskatchewan. Thank you, Rob. Airdrie says yes. It's hard to tell what other groups. Sherry from Lacombe Ringette says yes, we're willing. Sherwood Park says yes, they already have their Learn to Play program. Everyone says we'd like to. Spruce Grove is saying we'd like to. The same constraints are going to come up every time. We're always going to have, maybe not always ideally, but ice will be the problem everywhere, but there are other things beyond ice that we can do. Rob, I see your hand. I will get to you in one moment. Dave is just commenting, again, these programs could be anything from gym to come try Ringette to Learn to Play, these sort of programs that James explained, that really dynamic recruitment system. Managing open registration, so it's not just September. Lynette is saying, yes, I think Flex will be attractive this fall, especially given a possible, the economic strain we know is coming. Red Deer's already doing Come Try Ringette. Yes, lots of groups already do Come Try Ringette. I'll pass the floor to Rob. I believe you have something you would like to share.
Sorry, I'm at work, so it's hard to get away to have this conversation, but I really enjoyed that last talk about the open registration. We had to turn players away in the fall because our registration was closed, and it's a shame to have to turn those players away and say, oh, sorry, you have to wait until next season, when our girls or our athletes are our biggest sellers of the sport. And they go into school and they, through September and October and be like, oh, I made the A team, or, I got to play on step 3 or whatever. And they're excited. And then their friends hear about it and then they want to come join the sport. But by then it's too late. So I like the idea of the open registration. I just don't know how to implement it at a smaller level or for smaller associations when, like I said earlier, ice is a massive limiter for us, especially during the week, and then trying to stuff extra kids onto teams that may already be at capacity to begin with, if that makes sense. But I do really like it, and I think it's something that hopefully we can explore and move towards in the future.
I want to put this out. Sorry, I'm just reading a couple questions at once. Dave has a question for Rob, I think. Who decided, I guess let's put this out to the group. I want to put it back to Dave. Who decides the registration is closed? I know there's a date for teams. I believe it's in October for like Ringette Alberta registration, but I guess the association decides when their registration is closed.
So I could, for our association, our registration essentially closed right up to the start of when, not even, I think we even accepted a player after UAAs. So it wasn't necessarily that it was closed, like people can ask to join. Like the example from this last season, we had a player move from hockey to ringette, and they didn't go through the UAA process, and they were then allowed to, where we accepted them into the association, and then they just played on a lower team because we didn't have the ability to reassess them at that point. I'm not sure if it was the right way to do it, but that's just kind of what our board decided to do with that one player. Going forward and looking at the other levels in which players had requested to play, our teams were already at capacity. And when I say capacity, it's getting to the point where when you're talking about your half-ice teams and getting too many players out there, I know with our active starts, we had 24 and they were jammed on one side of the ice and it was a bit much. So it's not that it was technically closed. It's just, it's kind of closed in terms of we were at capacity for our teams. And with a 20 to 22% growth over the last 3 years, we're stretched, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I remember having some other conversations with other members of Fort Saskatchewan Ringette with like, there's great growth in that community, but now you're almost have a good problem. And I think this is a combination of things that I think can get ironed out, right? Like, so if registration policy is open, maybe there's some clarifications or more resources to allow you to do UAAs if you chose to do, if you felt you needed to do UAA evaluations. Maybe there's maybe we can provide resources about how to place people without using the UAAs. And I know ice is a problem,
we had.
Yeah,
that like the struggle was where to select this player, and the reality is that player should have played on our B/A team, but we weren't really sure what to do with it. And to make it fair for those girls that did go through the process, showed up to camp, showed up to the UAAs, we didn't really think it was fair to just have a new player come and then get put on that team without being evaluated and then overstepping other players that were already there. So we felt it was the most fair for all players, not just that one player, but all the players involved in the process.
Right. And, if it's a one-off, maybe that works, but maybe we come up with a framework, whether it's Ringette Alberta, whether it's regional, whatever, to assist in situations such as that. Jeremy had a comment that tied into this. He said, I think there's value in putting some more of the open registration concept on the Ringette Alberta website, so maybe we can review it a little bit more. The number one question will always be, well, how does that work? As is with everything we've tried to implement recently. And then he follows up with, yes, publish a framework, please. Like the idea is great. And I think that's something I've heard through my role at Ringette Alberta is not just having the UAAs, but having some more evaluation frameworks and templates. I know that's something that Bronwyn and I thought of. And we've talked about on and off a few times because, there's more to Ringette than just the UAAs, right? The skating skill and et cetera. We could spend lots of time on that as well. Sorry, I'm just scrolling back up so I get this question right. It was asked, what numbers approximately is James referring to when he mentions to 30 to 50%? So James, you're saying that between 30 and 50% of your registrants come, let's call it late after the traditional registration timeline.
Yeah, so when I say that, I'm talking about the Fun 1s and Fun 2s. So that's your U7, U9. So typically on September 1st, we'll have in Fun 1, Fun 2, we'll have about 25 players that have registered through the normal process. And then we will add and grow up to about 40 players by the, usually by January. But we've added players in at the end of January before to get them on the ice and get them into the sport.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to unmute Keith Geese. Did you have a question? You had a hand up here.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, just going to the flex ringette. I was under the impression from what I read and saw that the teams were made up, but numbers seemed low in the second half. Was there any flexibility amongst those girls wanting to, like they said they didn't want to do like a drop-in thing, right? Which would be
Correct.
just kind of making teams on the spot, right? But if numbers are that low, or they're having troubles making up a teams, does mixing them up, was that really a big issue with them, or?
No, we had basically two teams, a blue team and a yellow team. And if one team had more players than the other, then we just gave them the opposing jersey and mixed them all up so that there is an even number of players per team for that game.
Okay. Yeah, because I guess the reason why I'm asking is because I'm just trying to think, like, I'm from the north, right? So, and I'm just trying to think of like I see it happen at Open a lot. They ref a lot of Open, and there's times where they end up turning it into an exhibition game because it's like, well, we don't have enough players, but we still want to play. And that is the attitude and the mentality of the Open League, is that they just want to play. And I'm assuming that's the same thing with the U16 and U19 with the flex ringette, right? They just want to play, but are they being sticky or anything about being all sticky about rules and stuff, or do they just go with the flow and want to play, right? Like it,
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, we just went with the flow and did what was right for that game.
Yeah, no, because I understand there's like at that age group with ringette, there's you see the numbers really drop in the U16 and 19, especially with teams and stuff, and it's a lot of it is, it's, yeah, you're right, it's the time commitment or not wanting to commit, and so it would be nice to see flex ringette keep the numbers up even if they're not playing the way we normally see ringette played, right? So
yeah,
okay, that was kind of where I just wanted to go with that, is how flexible they were. I know flex ringette's very trial and error right now, and it was a pilot project, right? So
Yep, thank you,
okay.
Keith.
Okay, thank you.
One thing I wanted to add about flex, I was thinking about this as the presentation was going, is or one thing to clarify, because we talked about it a little bit at some athlete committee meetings, which I sort of am the liaison for, and through other athlete surveys, is that the big thing for flex was, like you said, they did not want to just be drop-in, and they also did not want to be called recreational. When we formed the athlete committee, I had asked everyone what quote-unquote area of ringette they felt they represented, whether it was, and I think I told them youth competitive, youth recreational, adult competitive recreational. I think I added high performance as well. And not a single person said they were recreational, even though maybe now they were playing Open C, and as someone who plays on in the NRL, I was like, that is recreational, but it's not really. Every like ringette as a sport is competitive. The game is competitive, so they didn't want to be called recreational. We don't have recreational ringette. We have flex ringette, which is just flexible ringette and allows those players to stay involved without the time commitment, right? This allowed them to play school sports. It allowed them to go to a job. It allowed them to focus on school. But they still had that competitive game, and they wanted to have that competitive experience for that once a week instead of having to commit to it multiple times a week. Based on some of the ongoing conversation in the chat as well, the big thing that I think going forward, especially if groups are interested in either some of these programs or this open registration concept, is there will definitely need to be clarification on policies and probably adjustments in policies, to be honest. And I think everyone needs to be open to that. Jen has her hand up. Go ahead, Jen. You need to unmute yourself. I'm not sure what happened there.
Telling me to unmute and I don't know.
I know, there you go. No, now you're back again. Click it again.
I'm a rookie.
Okay, go ahead now.
Two things. Back to the learn to play. One thing I did miss was that we kept it the same time, same place every week. If you can manage that, that is key, because you know, on Monday Mary has dance, and on Tuesday she has swimming. Oh, Ringette's on Wednesdays. Excellent. We can fit that into our programming. So that's really important. And just to your comment about recreational Ringette, just being recreational, all levels are competitive within their own level.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jen. Michelle wants, Jen has a question for you, says, what was the date you started the Learn to Play program? That was sometime in January, I believe?
We started the second, we ran it on Mondays. I think it was the second Monday of January, and then went to, well, or you just go to Family Day and count back 5 or 6 weeks kind of thing backwards. And then the week after Family Day, we counted 5, 6 weeks forwards. And those were the lengths of our programs.
And that's 2 separate sessions, correct?
2 sessions, yep. And we had some people sign up for one, and then they also signed up for the second one right after, so.
Great, thank you. Bronwyn has her hand up. Go ahead, Bronwyn.
Jen, just, I was wondering this earlier, you said, and unless I misunderstood, you said that you had kids who did the Learn to Play last year, but they weren't quite ready to play this year. So they redid the program. I was just wondering how that went, if there were issues with these kids feeling like they were repeating the same level.
No, they were, am I muted?
Nope, go ahead.
They were, so the year before they were 5.
Right.
Or maybe even 4.5 in January, and weren't 5 till September, right?
Yeah.
Or November, December, I don't know. And then they came back, you know, they're little, so 6, 8 weeks of a program to
okay.
Was
I was just trying to see, because obviously, well, hopefully, if you have enough kids, you kind of divide them anyway within those groups, right?
Yeah, so what we do, like, right away is we play a game, and then we divide them up into 3 groups via somewhat on age and somewhat on skating skill.
Sure. Okay.
Really quickly, and it's not like UAA quality.
No,
it's just like you take a glimpse, and then as the weeks go on, kids kind of move around as well into different groups. But yeah, no, the kids that were there the year before, they were like so excited because
they're gung ho, right? Because they know
they were gung ho because they knew what was going on, and they kind of had a good feel for what was going on, and now they're ready to play, you know.
Yeah.
And not all parents quite often with 5-year-olds have 2-year-old and a 1-year-old and a newborn. So once a week at the same time is good for that family at that time, until they're ready to move on with more. We had one girl, she was the oldest of, I don't know, 5 kids or something. It was crazy. It was an oops with twins.
Oh, no.
So, you know, they worked well for them, and so.
Awesome, thanks.
Go ahead, Dave. Dave, you are on mute right now.
Okay, I was off mute, but now I'm okay. So one of the issues that we see every year brand new skaters or people that have a little bit of skating experience but no ringette experience that are joining a little later, having them integrated into what we'll call more experienced teams, and then associations struggling with essentially it impacts competitive equity. What really should be happening is that learn to play concept or introduction to like a learn to skate and then a learn to play or an introduction to ringette should actually be the default on ramp for those players before we put them on these full-on ringette teams. Now, I know that not every association in the province can run all of these programs, but this is where we've got to get a little smarter and start to have these programs run in cooperation with neighboring associations. And then when people graduate from those programs, they could be moved into a regular ringette program. This is essentially what they do in Finland. They call it ringette school. So they have kids anywhere from 5 to 13, and they do create sort of more age appropriate groups within that broad group. And those people are allowed to be in that program as they're first sort of getting involved in the sport. And then when they're ready, then they're moved into what I'm using the air quotes right now, we call a regular ringette program. This is really about making it easy for people to say yes to joining our sport and making easy on-ramps. We kind of have to start to get out of this sort of very rigid, everybody joins in September and stays for the whole year type of approach to marketing our sport if we want to grow. So that's a little bit of my soapbox there. And so I'm going to just get off the soapbox and leave you to discuss any more of that you want to.
To be clear, that's his soapbox for the day. He gets a different one each day that we're in the office. So, but we all do, so it's okay. To add on to what Dave says, that's sort of a problem. Let's call it a problem for lack of a better word with current Come Try Ringette. The conversion rate of Come Try Ringette is so low compared to this Learn to Play program. There could be lots of different reasons for this, but ideally you have something like James shared where you have gym ringette tied to a Learn to Play program, tied to an on ice Come Try Ringette, and etc. So instead, maybe you run your Come Try Ringette at a different time. Maybe we don't run it in the fall in September. Maybe we run one, or maybe run one then, and we run one early in January, so then people can join the Learn to Play. And as well as we have gym ringette, as some of you may have seen. Either you've rented the equipment from us, or you've had a university, what's their name now? The Northern Alberta University Ringette Club, formerly the U of A Ringette Club, does run these sessions when school is actually in May and June. They go and teach all the phys ed classes for a day or a couple of days at a school, and they bring the gym ringette equipment and they talk about how awesome ringette is. But the difficulty we have with that, and we think that's a great program, and it's awesome to have ringette in school at any time, but it's difficult for them to tie that directly to a Learn to Play or a Come Try Ringette program. So we have all these awesome ideas and programs. They're a little bit disjointed, and they're not working together. And as Dave said, it might take a regional approach. I'm just going to catch up in the comments here. Rob from Fort Saskatchewan had said they moved 2 skaters out of Active Start to Step 1 because of the obvious age and skill difference, which is, again, ties into that needs to be the norm. We can't, just because you're on one team or on one level, if in a couple weeks you've made crazy progress, or perhaps they were not evaluated properly, you need to be open to those changes. I had another comment on that, and now I can't remember. Oh yes, and that Active Start is not always the first place you go, right? So maybe if the child is 7, Active Start might not be the best place, or perhaps they have other like really awesome skating and sport experience and they pick up the sport really well. Active Start is not the right place for them. We have to remember the Active Start, in the Active Start program and in the STEPS program right now, age is not the defining factor on where you go Keith, I will pop to you in one moment. Michelle had asked a question. I just want to find it. She said, are you recommending associations start a learn to play before quote unquote regular ringette begins? So maybe like in August, sort of like a camp. Dave says, not in August. It's rare for this target group to be thinking ice sport in August, which is true. We find new people to sport are not thinking about signing up in July when the rest of us are, or June or whatever it is. New people to the sport are looking when fall and winter start coming around. You know, we think ice all the time. Dave says in Daveville, which is his perfect ring out world, he'd like to see.
Robin. Go ahead.
Daveville. He says, I'd like to see a formal school program where gym ringette is shown. Those kids then are handed learn to skate or intro to ringette program info piece. They participate in those programs. They can re-enroll in those programs, such as Jen described, until they can enroll in quote unquote regular ringette, which is sort of what I was alluding to there, where we have all these programs that just need to work together better. Keith, go ahead. You're gonna have to unmute yourself, I think.
There we go.
Yep.
Yeah, no, just going to the different youth programs there. So yeah, with my little one, to come try ringette for the 1 day thing, it worked great for her. She loved it. She had so much fun. I didn't think that she was gonna back out. With the one, when Sherwood Park did it last year, and for the first time, it was actually my fiance's sister. She was not 8 at the time, and I put her in. We just weren't sure about her, and like I said, she only lasted 4 weeks. Like, she was always the one crying on the ice. But what I really liked about what Sherwood Park had set up is it was literally, it was $10 an ice session is the way I looked at it, but it allowed me to be able to put her out there and get her going out week after week to see if it worked for her, right? Which it didn't, unfortunately for her, but what I saw out there, and she touched on it, they figured it out right away, kind of where the girls were at, and split them up into their own kind of skill categories. And it was mainly AA players I saw out there working with the girls, and they were all really good at it. And they worked on skills and everything else. And so I thought it was a wonderful program, and it would be something that it would be nice to see everywhere. But also touching on, the regional thing, if you can't do it in every association, then maybe associations working together is a good idea too, right? So
absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Jen says thank you as well for sharing that.
Yeah.
Jody Newen chimed in. She's the chairperson of our athlete committee. She said she agrees with this gym ringette idea. She's seen that work well before in school to connect kids with the sport. This is also, I can't remember what webinar I was, who was running the webinar rather, but gym ringette can also tie and help you connect with groups that don't typically play ice sports. So these are the new Canadians. These are those of lower socioeconomic status. There's lots of stats out to say that there will be more immigration over the next decade. So something to consider is new Canadians often either are not familiar with ice sports, do not have the money or time for ice sports, have different priorities rather than signing up for ice sports 2 or 3 times a week. So one way to really connect with that community is to have gym ringette, and whether it leads into an on ice learn to play, or you have them signed up with your association and they do gym ringette the entire season, that's also cool. All right, unless anyone has something, oh, sorry, Jill says, I think teachers would welcome gym ringette if there's a program laid out or a group to put it on. I have run ringette at sports days in school, and it's well received. Yeah, thanks for sharing. Admittedly, the whole program for gym ringette is a little like the teachers get a binder, but as you know, that's not always great, and that's then on the teacher to go and learn a sport that they might not be familiar with beyond what they're already asked to do every single day. So it's definitely something to consider, whether that's maybe developed by your association. You know, each local association could start to connect with their communities. It could be a learning curve. I think I was talking to Sherwood Park Ringette. It was a bit of a learning curve in terms of how to get into the school. You know, when the teachers, when the teachers need that information, when they can schedule guests to come in. It's a little bit different than how we would normally schedule things. So that's something to learn. Dave has shared a few observations why Come Try Ringettes have such a low conversion rate. For those, it will be in our annual report coming soon, but this past recruitment season's conversion rate was 34% overall. I think that's actually kind of skewed because La Glace Ringette had a very high conversion rate, which brings the provincial rate up quite high. So one of the few of the things Dave mentions is that at Come Try Ringette events, you might not be checking in advance if participants have a skating skill or have skating skills, as Come Try Ringette is not really designed for new skaters. That would be like a learn to skate through Can Skate or something. You need to follow up, you need to have a parent meeting. And those are things that were explained and really well done through Sherwood Park Ringette's program. All right, I've appreciated this conversation and all of these questions and discussion, but quite frankly, I think it is getting towards everyone's bedtime. So I'd just like to wrap up by saying, as much as I'm sure you're tired of being told these are unprecedented times, because I am definitely tired of hearing that, it is true. And through this discussion, I think it's been clear that you may be forced to reconsider policies or practices as the new season unfolds because of COVID, because of these new concepts we're talking about. So I encourage you to look at these decisions through this athlete-centered lens that the athlete committee introduced us to today. I'd like to thank all of the presenters, Rachel, Mackenzie, and Rebecca of the Athlete Advisory Committee, Sandra and Jen of Sherwood Park Ringette, Mary from Calgary, and James from Richmond Ringette. I'd like to thank you all for attending. This presentation has been recorded, and we'll let you know where and when it is available for you to rewatch it, go back to it. If you'd like any extra information from our presenters, I'm sure we can make that happen as well. Just get in touch with us. And other than that, have a good night, everyone.